Welcome to another episode of Mike Reads. Tonight we'll be continuing our series on Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations with Book 4, Chapter 3. This will be our third read in Part 1 with Chapter 3 entitled, of the extraordinary restraints upon the importation of goods of almost all kinds from those countries with which the balance is supposed to be disadvantageous. Again, we left off about two-thirds of the way through Part 1. The owners of bank credits and the holders of receipts constitute two different sorts of creditors against the bank. The holder of a receipt cannot draw out the bullion for which it is granted without reassigning to the bank a sum of bank money equal to the price at which the bullion had been received. If he has no bank money of his own, he must purchase it of those who have it. The owner of bank money cannot draw out bullion without producing to the bank receipts for the quantity which he wants. If he has none of his own, he must buy them of those who have them. The holder of a receipt, when he purchases bank money, purchases the power of taking out a quantity of bullion of which the mint price is 5% above the bank price. The agio of 5%, therefore, which he commonly pays for it, is paid not for an imaginary, but for a real value. The owner of bank money, when he purchases a receipt, purchases the power of taking out a quantity of bullion of which the market price is commonly from 2 to 3% above the mint price. The price which he pays for it, therefore, is paid likewise for a real value. The price of the receipt and the price of the bank money compound or make up between them the full value or price of the bullion. Upon deposits of the coin current in the country, the bank grants receipts likewise as well as bank credits, but those receipts are frequently of no value and will bring no price in the market. Upon ducatoons, for example, which in the currency pass for 3 guilders 3 stivers each, the bank gives a credit of 3 guilders only, or 5% below their current value. It grants a receipt likewise entitling the bearer to take out the number of ducatoons deposited at any time within 6 months upon paying 1/4% for the keeping. This receipt will frequently bring no price in the market. 3 guilders bank money generally sell in the market for 3 guilders 3 stivers, the full value of the ducatoons, if they were taken out of the bank, and before they can be taken out, 1/4% must be paid for the keeping, which would be mere loss to the holder of the receipt. If the agio of the bank, however, should at any time fall to 3%, such receipts might bring some price in the market, and might sell for 1 3/4%. But the agio of the bank being now generally about 5%, such receipts are frequently allowed to expire, or, as they express it, to fall to the bank. The receipts which are given for deposits of gold ducats fall to it yet more frequently, because a higher warehouse rent, or 1/2%, must be taken for the keeping of them before they can be taken out again. The 5% which the bank gains, when the deposits either of coin or bullion are allowed to fall to it, may be considered as the warehouse rent for the perpetual keeping of such deposits. The sum of bank money for which the receipts are expired must be very considerable. It must comprehend the whole original capital of the bank, which, it is generally supposed, has been allowed to remain there from the time it was first deposited, nobody caring either to renew his receipt or to take out his deposit, as, for the reasons already assigned, neither the one nor the other could be done without loss. But whatever may be the amount of this sum, the proportion which it bears to the whole mass of bank money is supposed to be very small. The Bank of Amsterdam has for these many years past been the great warehouse of Europe for bullion, for which the receipts are very seldom allowed to expire, or, as they express it, to fall to the bank. The far greater part of the bank money, or of the credits upon the books of the bank, is supposed to have been created for these many years past by such deposits which the dealers in bullion are continually both making and withdrawing. No demand can be made upon the bank but by the means of a receipt, of a reciproce, or a receipt. The smaller mass of bank money for which the receipts are expired is mixed and confounded with the much greater mass for which they are still in force, so that, though there may be a considerable sum of bank money for which there are no receipts, there is no specific sum or portion of it which may not at any time be demanded by one. The bank cannot be debtor to two persons for the same thing, and the owner of bank money who has no receipt cannot demand payment of the bank till he buys one. In ordinary and quiet times, he can find no difficulty in getting one to buy at the market price, which generally corresponds with the price at which he can sell the coin or bullion it entitles him to take out of the bank. It might be otherwise during a public calamity, an invasion, for example, such as that of the French in 1672. The owners of bank money, then all eager to draw it out of the bank, in order to have it in their own keeping, the demand for receipts might raise their price to an exorbitant height. The holders of them might form extravagant expectations and, instead of 2 or 3%, demand half the bank money for which credit had been given upon the deposits that the receipts had respectively been granted for. The enemy, informed of the constitution of the bank, might even buy them up in order to prevent the carrying away of the treasure. In such emergencies, the bank, it is supposed, would break through its ordinary rule of making payment only to the holders of receipts. The holders of receipts who had no bank money must have received within 2 or 3% of the value of the deposit for which their respective receipts had been granted. The bank, therefore, it is said, would in this case make no scruple of paying, either with money or bullion, the full value of what the owners of bank money who could get no receipts or were credited for in its books, paying at the same time 2 or 3% to such holders of receipts as had no bank money, that being the whole value which in this state of things could justly be supposed due to them. Even in ordinary and quiet times, it is the interest of the holders of receipts to depress the agio in order to either buy bank money, and consequently the bullion which their receipts would then enable them to take out of the bank, so much cheaper, or to sell their receipts to those who have bank money and who want to take out bullion so much dearer, the price of a receipt being generally equal to the difference between the market price of bank money and that of the coin or bullion for which the receipt had been granted. It is the interest of the owners of bank money, on the contrary, to raise the agio in order to either sell their bank money so much dearer or to buy a receipt so much cheaper. To prevent the stock jobbing tricks which those of opposite interests might sometimes occasion, the bank has of late years come to the resolution to sell at all times bank money for currency at 5% agio, and to buy it in again at 4% agio. In consequence of this resolution, the agio can never either rise above 5 or sink below 4%, and the proportion between the market price of bank and that of current money is kept at all times very near the proportion between their intrinsic values. Before this resolution was taken, the market price of bank money used sometimes to rise so high as 9% agio, and sometimes to sink so low as par, according as opposite interests happened to influence the market. The Bank of Amsterdam professes to the Bank of Amsterdam professes to lend out no part of what is deposited with it, but for every guilder for which it gives credit in its books, to keep in its repositories the value of a guilder either in money or bullion. That it keeps in its repositories all the money or bullion for which there are receipts in force, for which it is at all times liable to be called upon, and which in reality is continually going from it and returning to it again, cannot well be doubted. But whether it does so likewise with regard to that part of its capital for which the receipts are long expired, for which in ordinary and quiet times it cannot be called upon, and which in reality is very likely to remain with it forever, or as long as the states of the United Provinces subsist, may perhaps appear more uncertain. At Amsterdam, however, no point of faith is better established than that for every guilder, circulated as bank money, there is a correspondent guilder in gold or silver to be found in the treasury of the bank. The city is guarantee that it should be so. The bank is under the direction of the 4 reigning burgomasters, who are changed every year. Each new set of burgomasters visits the treasure, compares it with the books, receives it upon oath, and delivers it over with the same awful solemnity to the set which succeeds, and in that sober and religious country oaths are not yet disregarded. A rotation of this kind seems alone a sufficient security against any practices which cannot be avowed. Amidst all the revolutions which faction has ever occasioned in the government of Amsterdam, the prevailing party has at no time accused their predecessors of infidelity in the administration of the bank. No accusation could have affected more deeply the reputation and fortune of the disgraced party, and if such an accusation could have been supported, we may be assured that it would have been brought. In 1672, when the French king was at Utrecht, the Bank of Amsterdam paid so readily as left no doubt of the fidelity with which it had observed its engagements. Some of the pieces which were then brought from its repositories appeared to have been scorched with fire, which happened in the town house soon after the bank was established. Those pieces, therefore, must have lain there from that time. What may be the amount of the treasure in the bank is a question which has long employed the speculations of the curious. Nothing but conjecture can be offered concerning it. It is generally reckoned that there are about 2,000 people who keep accounts with the banks, and allowing them to have, one with another, the value of £1,500 sterling lying upon their respective accounts, a very large allowance, the whole quantity of bank money, and consequently of treasure in the bank, will amount to about 3 million sterling, or, at 11 guilders the pound sterling, 33 millions of guilders, a great sum insufficient to carry on a very extensive circulation, but vastly below the extravagant ideas which some people have formed of this treasure. The city of Amsterdam derives a considerable revenue from the bank. Besides what may be called the warehouse rent above mentioned, each person, upon first opening an account with the bank, pays a fee of 10 guilders, and for every new account 3 guilders 3 stivers, for every transfer of 2 stivers, and if the transfer is for less than 300 guilders, 6 stivers in order to discourage the multiplicity of transactions. The person who neglects to balance his account twice in the year forfeits 25 guilders. The person who orders a transfer for more than is upon his account is obliged to pay 3% for the sum overdrawn, and his order is set aside into the bargain. The bank is supposed to make a considerable profit by the sale of the foreign coin or bullion which sometimes falls to it by the expiring of receipts, and which is always kept till it can be sold with advantage. It makes a profit likewise by selling bank money at 5% agio, and buying it in at 4. These different emoluments amount to a good deal more than what is necessary for paying the salaries of officers and defraying the expense of management. What is paid for the keeping of bullion upon receipts is alone supposed to amount to a neat annual revenue of between 150,000 and 200,000 guilders. Public utility, however, and not revenue, was the original object of this institution. Its object was to relieve the merchants from the inconvenience of a disadvantageous exchange. The revenue which has arisen from it was unforeseen and may be considered as accidental. But it is now time to return from this long digression, into which I have been insensibly led in endeavoring to explain the reasons why the exchange between the countries which pay in what is called bank money and those which pay in common currency should generally appear to be in favor of the former and against the latter. The former pay in a species of money of which the intrinsic value is always the same, and exactly agreeable to the standard of their respective mints. The latter in a species of money of which the intrinsic value is continually varying, and is almost always more or less below that standard. All right, so that finishes up Book 4, Chapter 3, Part 1. We will continue in our next read with Part 2 of the unreasonableness of those extraordinary restraints upon other principles. So until the next time, this has been Mike, signing off.